The Polyglot Gathering is organized by Education at Internet.
Okay, thank you for coming in so many numbers. I did not expect there to be so many people, but I'm happy to hear that you're here to listen to me talk about what progress is in language learning. I think we talk about progress a lot. Obviously, the main goal of, the main objective of what we do is wanting to do progress. But I don't really think we ever talk about what that actually means, because progress comes in many ways, shapes, and forms. And I'm here to show some of that to you and why it is actually really difficult to get an exact estimate or an exact number of the progress that you've made. Because I'm pretty sure none of you would say, I've made 7 progress today. That just doesn't really make sense. So, okay. Progress comes in many forms, and there are some conventional ways that, even if you talk to non-language learners, they will understand what you're talking about. If I say I'm taking a level 1 Spanish class, then, my mom would understand, okay, she's starting to learn Spanish. And if I then upgrade to a level 2 Spanish class the next semester, then that means, okay, she made a little bit of progress. Obviously, then there's language exams, like the TOEFL or the Cambridge exam for English. They use different metrics to measure progress. Different languages have all kinds of different metrics. So the JLPT for Japanese, for example, does not have a speaking or a writing section. It is purely whether you can understand spoken and written language and know the grammar that is present in the text. Then the DELE and DEL for Spanish, I'm not sure how they work, but I'm pretty sure they also use the CEFR scale, which is what we all have on our badges. And then you can also take, for example, the time that you studied. I've been studying Japanese for probably 7 years at this point. But you can also say, I've been studying Korean for so and so many days. I've taken so and so many years of classes in Spanish, and so on and so forth. These are all ways, if you told your non-language learning friends, I'm pretty sure they would understand what you're saying. Maybe the CEFR scale, not so much. But for the rest, they have an idea of what you're talking about, how much progress you've made. If I say, I'm on the level 5 out of 6 scale on the TOPIK exam, well then I'm probably pretty good at Korean. Versus if I say I've only just passed the level 1 exam, then I'm probably only just starting out in Korean. But then all of these metrics have some issues with them because, If we take language classes, for example, right? I could take a language class and not really care. I just go to classes, I kind of do my homework, and that's about it. And then my best friend, however, she is really into the class. She really wants to learn the language. She does her homework. Maybe she even meets with a tutor outside of class. And by the end of that class, she will have made a lot of progress. Unlike me, who was lazy and barely did anything. But we both did the same level of class, and we both passed the same level of class. So her progress should be the same as mine, but obviously it isn't, because she put in more effort. The same goes for language exams too. Imagine you're preparing for a B2 German exam, and you're putting in the time and the effort, you're meeting with the tutor, you're learning new phrases, you're practicing the grammar that you've learned. But then, the day of the exam, maybe you had a bad day of sleep or something. Maybe there's a topic on the exam that you didn't really prepare for, that you're not really familiar with, and suddenly, well, you did really bad on the exam. You failed. But you didn't catastrophically fail, you maybe miss 2 points to pass the exam. Now, if you go to an employer or a university and say, hey, I took the B2 exam, but I'm missing 2 points, they're going to look at you and say, okay, I don't care, because they will not care. If you've not passed the exam and obtained the certificate, that means nothing. Obviously, in those cases, though, you still made progress. If you've been sitting there and studying for months and days and you did all the things necessary, then you still made progress, even if you did not pass the exam. And these are all issues with metrics that we really need to be aware of. There are a lot of ways to track progress, but as you can see, individual differences, for example, make a big difference. I could be studying for 2 hours a day, but most of my time just goes into making pretty notes and underlining the same 5 lines over and over. Then I studied for 2 hours, technically, but someone who maybe used the 2 hours to read newspapers, listen to podcasts, go to class, do their homework, that's 2 very different hours of progress. Obviously, the quality of study also makes a massive difference, as I explained in the example with me going to language class and my friend also going to language class. Well, those are 2 very different language classes we're taking, essentially, because I don't care, my friend really cares. She's making a lot of progress, I am not. And then, as I said with the exam example, there's arbitrary thresholds. If I don't pass an exam, that doesn't matter to the employer. They don't care whether I just barely passed it. They want to know, did you pass it or did you not pass it? And if you didn't, they think you don't know anything, because you can't say I'm like 2 points away from being fluent or being able to use the language. So when we measure progress, we have to be aware of the metrics that we are using, and we have to be aware of the limitations that come with them. So the things I just talked about were a little more conventional. As I said, your mom, your non-language learning friends will probably understand what they're about. But there are some other metrics that we as language learners probably use. That if you talk to your friends who don't learn languages, they might look at you a little funny, like, what are you saying? So there are some general ways we can track that are language unspecific. For example, counting the hours that we studied, right? Some people use trackers for that to track, okay, I've studied for 2 hours today, I've read for 30 minutes today. I think that's a great way to track. It gives you a sense of progress because the number keeps climbing and climbing. Obviously, there's also like chapters in textbook, for example. If you're using a textbook that, is pretty common for the language that you're learning, then other people that are also learning that language might get a sense of, oh, okay, you just finished the 2nd book in that series, so you might be around this and that level. Or you've just finished that and that grammar point, okay, that gives me an idea you're not a complete beginner anymore. Then there are also language-specific ways of tracking progress, obviously. For example, I'm a Japanese learner. Chinese characters are a part of the Japanese language. And when I talk to other Japanese learners, knowing how many Chinese characters they know gives me a better idea of how far they are into their studies. For example, if I talk to someone and they tell me, oh, okay, I know like 50 to 70 characters, that tells me they've only just started. They've, made their first few steps into the Japanese language, but they couldn't really read books yet. Whereas if I talk to someone and they tell me that they already know the, I think, most common 2,100 characters it is, then I know, oh, okay, they are pretty proficient at the language to a point where they can read newspapers, they can read books, and it generally shouldn't be an issue if I show them a text, they would understand it. If I ask a Spanish speaker how many Chinese characters they know, that's a silly question because Chinese characters are not a part of the Spanish language. So this is very language specific. Then for a Spanish example, I know a lot of people struggle with the subjunctive, so that is kind of a milestone that when you have a feeling for how the subjunctive work, you understand the concept behind it and you can use it accurately for the most part. That's a milestone where people say, okay, you've made a big step towards being pretty good at the language. But, of course, there are many other ways to track progress. This is just a very limited list. There are also issues with these, of course. And there are going to be issues with literally every single way we track progress. I will get to that in a second, but before I do, I would like to ask you if there are any language milestones or ways that you track progress that may be specific to the language you're learning, or milestones that you're looking forward to hit them, to know that I've made it. I know this language now. I would be interested to hear if you have any ideas.
Number of words you know.
Number of words you know, yes. Sorry? Being able to understand puns, yes. Yes, once you feel confident speaking the language, using the language.
What Harry Potter book do you read?
The Harry Potter books, yes. A lot of people read Harry Potter to learn a language. Yes?
Just how many books you read in general, or how many pages you read?
How many books or pages you read? Yes, that can be a great indicator.
How many words?
How many words? Yes.
Next step on the list, making puns.
Making, oh, that is quite an expertise level of knowledge, but yes. Yeah.
To be able to speak in our own languages. I don't speak English.
To be able to speak openly with a lot of people.
Dreaming in a foreign language.
Dreaming in a foreign language, yes.
Being able to talk around what you don't know.
Being able to talk around what you don't know. Yeah, not when you're unaware or when you're unsure of how to say a certain thing, you kind of know a way around it. That's quite a milestone. Yes, please.
When you accidentally say something in foreign word, for example, you get someone on the street and it's a Polyglot, then you know. Okay,
Oh, when those words accidentally come out, that's true. Yes, please.
Having a conversation with someone and a native speaker and they don't switch back to English.
Yes, for some languages, that is a big achievement. The natives will be so quick to switch to English in some languages, and then, that's when you know you made it. Yes,
Being able to give a presentation in a foreign language?
that is also true. Yes.
Duolingo day 3.
Okay, I think that's maybe a controversial one, but that can be an indicator of something. Yes.
The ability to talk about things other than languages.
Yes, that is true. The first thing we usually learn about is how did you learn this language? How long have you been studying? And once you know more language, you can talk about more interesting things. The languages are very interesting. Yes.
My favorite was when I started to travel without a dictionary.
The dictionary?
Without a dictionary to the, let's say, English-speaking country.
Sorry.
I'm not native speaker of English.
Oh, when you understand a dictionary entry.
Without the dictionary.
Oh yeah, dictionary. Understanding things without needing a dictionary is great. I love that. Okay.
Being able to have a conversation over the telephone.
Oh, that is true. The audio quality, we're in 2025, and sometimes it's hard. It's hard.
Arguing with customer service on the telephone.
That's great. I love that. Never tried it, but maybe that's a good way to know that, yeah, I now know how to argue over the phone with customer service. That's quite cool. Yes? True, kind of the same with the puns, right? It requires a lot of knowledge, a lot of wittiness to understand that type of language. Yes.
Yeah, there's a you could learn Chinese so you could do stand-up Chinese.
Oh, wow, okay.
Understanding metaphors.
Metaphors, yeah, like poetry in general, pretty difficult. I struggle with that in German, and that's my native language. Yes. The winning part is the important part, right? Not the fighting, the winning. Yes.
Having a sense for when you make a mistake or when you say something that is unnatural.
Oh, yeah. Self-correcting when you're able to spot your own mistakes and can backtrack essentially and say, oh, this was not correct. That is true. That requires a certain amount of awareness and language knowledge. Yes.
YouTube gives you suggestion for it.
That is true, yeah. You just keep looking, and then eventually YouTube thinks you're maybe a native of the language. Yes. Oh, yeah, that is true. Functioning in another country, that is difficult. It requires a lot to do bureaucracy in a foreign language. Survive with the nutrition and the food? Oh, knowing like food vocabulary and cooking and taking care of yourself, that is also true, yes. Numbers are so difficult. It's always the thing I learned the very last. Okay. That was a lot. Thank you for that. Yeah, maybe one last one.
Understanding the national use of that language and writing a constructive critic on YouTube, for example.
Writing a constructive criticism of what?
Of the topic that is being
Of a topic, yes, being able to write in a nice way, not kind of slang like chat type. Yes, it's, all these things are very good milestones or progress trackers. Thank you for that. As I said, they all have some kind of issue though. The milestones maybe not as much, but some ways to track progress do obviously also have limitations. And it's good some of you already mentioned this, because these are some of the things I came up with. The books read. Now, reading books is obviously really good. It's a great way to learn languages. I'm very in favor of reading when you learn a language. But imagine I read 5 children's books and someone else reads 5 novels. That's a very different level of language we're talking about. 5 novels, to read a novel, you need a certain level of a language, or you look up a lot of words and take a long time to read them. But so you need to consider, okay, when this person says they read 30 books in this language, what did they actually read? And maybe they actually did read 30 books. That's really impressive. I mean, reading 30 children's books is also really impressive, but it's just a very different level we're talking about here. Now, another milestone I wrote down because it happened to me with Korean just a few weeks ago. The first meme, you understand. I was really proud of myself because my Korean is really quite limited, but I understood it, and it felt great. Then words now known, that was already mentioned. I'm a big fan of tracking how many words you know. Obviously not manually, because that would take forever, would be impossible. I use software to do that for me. Now with words known, you kind of get into the topic of what is a word, which I don't have time to talk about because that's a big discussion. But to see this progress, you read a book, and then the number of words you know goes up and up as you read the book, and the book gets easier and easier as you read it. Some of you may know this, have this experience as well. I love that. That is pretty much my favorite way of tracking. Then the first spontaneous interaction you have, sometimes maybe someone comes up to you and you're like, oh, I know this language, hold on, I understand them, and you can help them. Maybe they're asking for the way or something. That is a great feeling when for the first time outside of the classroom, you're actually using the language in a real setting. That's a pretty great feeling. And then obviously mastering the sounds, like your pronunciation, when you can speak well, maybe there was a particularly difficult sound that you didn't really know how to say, but then one day you just practice so much and it comes out pretty naturally. That is a pretty nice feeling as well. Okay, again, everything we talked about is very dependent on a lot of other factors, and that is because really what we care about is the language knowledge we have. So for the last maybe few minutes of this talk, I want to talk about what language knowledge is and why it is so difficult to track our language knowledge. Okay, language knowledge is a very abstract concept. It is the underlying knowledge of the language that we have. And that language knowledge can be explicit or implicit. Like if I say, he, she, it, the S must fit. We all know that rule. In English, he, she, it, you gotta put an S there. That is an explicit rule. I think most of us probably learned that at school. We had a teacher talk to us about it. I know that explicitly, so that counts toward my language knowledge. But language knowledge can also be very implicit. I've read a bunch of things. I pick up new words, new grammar. Maybe I don't know how to explain that grammar. I just know that it is that way. And I can't necessarily formalize it. I couldn't explain it to someone else. But that is still language knowledge that you have. Language knowledge is also incredibly complex in the sense that it includes a lot of levels of the language. For example, the sounds. As I just said, you can have a good understanding of the sounds, you know how to pronounce the sounds, maybe know how to change the sounds in certain words because of certain rules. That's all language knowledge. Language knowledge also includes grammar. Grammar is also incredibly complex. You have syntax. How do the words fit together in a sentence? What order do they need to be in? But you can't really track all this knowledge, right? It is hard to say, oh, I now learned that in Japanese the verb goes last. Does that give me one language knowledge point or two, or maybe half one? I don't really know. It's impossible to track because these levels of language and language itself is obviously incredibly complex. The same example goes, for example, for words. Words can have many different meanings. The same word can have many different meanings. How do you track that? If you only know one meaning of the word, do you know the word? Do you not know the word? Do you know how to track that? As you see, it's impossible to measure language knowledge. That is why we use so many other ways to track our progress, like how many words we know, how many books we read. That's why we have these milestones that we want to hit, making a pun, understanding comedy, things like that. And with all these things, it is still important to remember to not necessarily compare your 2 hours of studying to someone else's hours of studying, because you don't know where their language level is at. You don't know what other advantages that they have potentially. As a German native speaker, my base language knowledge of Dutch, for example, is a lot higher than someone from maybe somewhere else, a Spanish speaker, for example. So when we measure and track our progress, we need to keep in mind that we come from different places and that all of them have drawbacks, but that they're still valid. I'm not saying any of this you shouldn't track. You definitely should track because it is really motivating, seeing the words known go up, seeing how many books you read by the end of the year. That is exciting and it is motivating and we should do it, but we should keep in mind that we all come from a different background. We all have different background knowledge, and that is basically it. I think we have maybe a slide. Oh, okay. Hold on. How do you use software to track known words? I use two softwares called Link and Migaku that you can use to basically mark words. You put your books into them and you can put them as marked as known. That's how I do it. There's a lot of different software out there, but that's just the two easiest to use for me. A quantitative metric per minute of talking, how much you have to stop and think, 90, 80, 50, helps to stay motivated and improve. That is interesting. I have never thought about that, but that is certainly a good way. The more you have to stop, when I speak Korean, that is pretty painful because I have to think about every single syllable, essentially. When I speak English, it comes out a lot more easily, I guess. How do you express your own personal language progress to others? See, and that's exactly the difficult part, because one way or another, we kind of need to talk to each other about where we are. And I mean, we do have these badges for that give you a general idea. However, when I look at my Dutch, for example, my Dutch reading is really good. My Dutch speaking, not so much. How do I say that? I just usually tell people, hey, I'm good at reading, I don't speak Dutch. And I think a lot of people might have some caveats like that, where it's like, I understand you really well, I just don't speak it really well. But that's obviously very difficult to put on these little flags. When measuring known words, do you differentiate or recommend differentiating between passive and active knowledge? That is an interesting question. I feel like with reading, that's not so much an issue because, when you read, you just passively understand all the words anyways. When speaking, it's really hard to measure active vocabulary because how would you possibly measure how much active vocabulary you know? I think that's one of those metrics that's also probably very difficult to measure. Which tools do you use to track number of words you know? Link and Migaku. What? Okay. Okay. Oh. When you track your time spent learning, how do you keep track of the quality of that time? That is, at the end of the day, the only person you're fooling is yourself, right? Like if you're tracking 2 hours, but you're on TikTok half of the time, you can track those 2 hours and maybe that's really impressive and all. But at the end of the day, the person benefiting or not benefiting is you. So you have to decide for yourself, how do I want to spend my time studying? And how do I track that? And how do I want to represent that? And how honest do I want to be with myself? I personally make an effort to, when it's study time, and I try to be focused and not be on Instagram and TikTok, which sometimes works, sometimes not so good, but whatever. If hypothetically you were to learn Cantonese, how would you measure the progress? That is a good question. Maybe I will learn Cantonese and then I will let you know, I guess. What? Yes, good point. What if we track our emotions, how much joy and confidence we have in speaking or understanding our target language? That's actually a good point because obviously how confident we feel in language might vary from day to day, right? I could have an amazing conversation today, and then the next day I go talk to the same person maybe even, and suddenly the words just get stuck. I don't really know what I want to say. The grammar is just non-existent. And suddenly that same person's like, you spoke to me fine just yesterday. What's happening here? So, it varies. Yeah, it really does. I don't think there's one way, you don't ever reach one level and it just stays there. It's an up and down for sure. What other apps do you... Okay, what other apps do you use to aid your language learning besides the ones you've already mentioned? I actually use something called a refold tracker, which is just a tracker to track your time. I really like that it, keeps everything in one place essentially. And it has different activities. If I'm reading for an hour, I can track an hour of reading. If I'm studying grammar for an hour, I can study grammar for an hour. And it kind of gives me an overview to see maybe I'm not doing enough grammar study. Maybe I'm not reading enough. Maybe I'm not listening to enough podcasts. And I feel like having an overview like that can be really helpful for sure. Since you track your progress, how do you use that data to improve your learning in the future? Basically, what I just said. I mean, if I notice that, I'm spending a lot of my time reading, which is what I'm currently doing in Japanese, and I notice maybe I'm not practicing my listening enough, which I definitely should do, then absolutely, I can see, okay, more than like 3/4 of my time are going into reading. I should probably spend a little more time listening to podcasts or YouTube videos, or maybe study some grammar, do some speaking practice, things like that. I think once you have data that you can see, you can use that data to inform your future decisions, essentially, to see what do I want to work on? Where am I lacking maybe a little bit? How do you monitor your trend? Do you ever set goals for the upcoming month, year, or review your past month, year, etc. to see if it was what you wanted? I'm actually a big fan of this. I think it is so important to constantly check in with yourself, see where you're at, how far have I come, what maybe isn't working so well, which also just goes back to the last two questions, and then go from there. And obviously, it takes time to find a system that works for you. I know some people like to just write down checklists, essentially, for every quarter, and then they check off things that they wanted to do. Other people use online trackers. Some people don't track at all, which is also fine. I think people should track at least somewhat, but you don't have to. You can make progress in the language even if you don't track what you're doing. Do you think the CEFR is a useful measure of progress? What would a better system be like? I don't really know what you think of that, because it's been a while since I looked at the CEFR charts and what each of the levels even means and what they talk about. So, I mean, we do in one way or another need to convey that we know language to a certain degree, and not every company or university can personally interview you to figure out whether you know the language. So this is probably the best thing we have right now. It's not optimal, but it works. What do you gain from having tracked progress aside from experiencing you improved? I mean, this is just a personal preferences, but I like graphs. I like seeing, the number of words I know go up. I like seeing, in 2022, I read this many books. In 2023, I read this many books. I think graphs are amazing. If you're not into graphs, I mean, knowing that you improved is a pretty good benefit, I would say. Just something for thoughts. I don't even know really a good way to measure my level of my mother tongue language. See, obviously, second languages and mother languages are two different things. It's really difficult to track where on the CEFR scale you fall with your mother tongue, because it is just, our brain works very differently with our mother tongue and our second languages. There's also the issue with, if you're a native speaker, maybe you grew up somewhere else, though you might not be familiar with all the vocabulary. So native language is a very different topic than second languages, I would say. And I'm not really familiar with that topic very well. What's my honest thoughts on Duolingo as a language learning tool? Duolingo is fun. It's cute. I don't think people should be using it to learn languages. Metric idea, how many minutes you can converse in before your brain feels tired? It's funny, I just had a conversation just the other day about how, you get tired pretty quickly when you start learning a language, and it just drains you so much, but then you actually get better. It does improve. There's hope. Is it even possible to track words known? You can only know one of the meanings, recognize them, but not use them spontaneously, forget them after a while. Yes, obviously, how many words you know is a very dynamic metric. You will always forget words. At this point in time, it's impossible for the software that we have to keep track of all the meanings that a word can have. So it is, again, just an approximation of what we know. But nevertheless, if I say I know 3,000 words, and someone else says, they use the same system that I use, and they say they know 10,000 words, I have a point of comparison. I can say, okay, 3,000 is fewer than 10,000, and so that person probably knows a lot more of the language than I do. But yes, it is obviously absolutely not a perfect way to track, and I agree with that, but as long as you're aware of these limitations, I think that's not an issue, just with all the other ways we can track. Do you just track the words you translated and hope will stick in your head? I mean, we tend to forget a lot of the words we learned or added. You just track the words you translated? Personally, I only track words that I actually know without translating them, because I think if you translate a word, there's a high chance you probably didn't know that word necessarily, but I'm not sure how to answer that other than that. How many different tools, apps, software do you use in your language learning? Do you mind mentioning all of them? Off the top of my head, Link, Migaku, Refold Tracker. There's a forest app that I use for tracking other things. I use textbooks. YouTube.com, sure, if we want to count that. I use, obviously, dictionary apps to translate. That's all I can think of right now. Thoughts on testing your listening comprehension with transcription? I think more people should do this. We sometimes think we understand something pretty well when maybe we don't. Transcriptions are listening comprehension on difficulty extreme, because you can't fool yourself. If you transcribe something, you don't understand it, you don't know what to write, there's going to be a blank spot where the word was supposed to be. I think this is a great way to test how well you actually understand something, yes. Something I find useful is to record myself speaking spontaneously. If you ever feel you're not making progress, watch the recording from a... Yes, that is so true. Okay. No, I think I sometimes look back at my old speaking practice and it's a little cringe, but once you get over the cringe, it's like, wait, I used to be I used to be so bad at this. Now I can actually speak pretty well, or use this expression, or express myself this way. I think it's a fun way. And I mean, you don't even have to show anyone, right? Just for yourself. Oh, that's such a nice comment. Thank you.